Why am I still emotionally eating and stress eating at this stage of my life? Do you ever ask yourself this question? Over the summer, I swung between emotional eating, honestly having literally no appetite because of stress. And if you caught my last video, it was all about overwhelm, stress and overwhelm in midlife. I gave you 3 tips to unpack your overwhelm, but sometimes overwhelm can be deeper. And I did share that I was going through something with my relationship through the summer and it completely shut me down. But at times it actually kicked off my old habit of emotional eating. So this video, I'd like to talk about that. And at the end of the video, while I might give you a few tips around emotional eating, I want you to know that it's up to you if you find that it's something you want to manage. All my videos are for education, information, and conversation. Please seek help from a licensed care practitioner if you think you have a health condition or struggling with a mental health condition or an eating disorder. I think that we make emotional eating like a huge problem in the wellness world. Like, hey, ditch your emotional eating, swap this for that, stop emotionally eating now. That gets attention because many of us, as we move into perimenopause and menopause, we're going through some body changes. I feel it even more as I age, and we don't like it. And that's something we have to talk about. We can live in 2 spaces where we dislike our body, we may want to accept our body, and we may want to, that's 3 spaces. We may want to change our body. And you do you, boo. I want you to do whatever fits you. Maybe you want to manage your emotional eating. That's cool. But I don't believe that a diet is going to do that, especially in midlife. You know, it's such a time of upheaval. It's a time of so much stress. So many emotional things are happening. Physical things are happening. We have changes in estrogen and progesterone. These actually can affect your desire to eat, your energy control or expenditure. They work in the brain when it comes to wanting to eat as well. And then, like, let's face it, when you're sleepless and you can't get to bed at night, you're going to wake up, you're going to crave more carbs, you're going to want some quick energy. So many things play into this like whole emotional eating that may actually be some of your biology, and we don't talk about that either. I think we should. So if you're new here, welcome. My name is Tanya, and I like to live on the internet talking about, menopause, but from a perspective that ditches food rules and helps embrace our aging. Ditch the rules of aging and find what works for you. So if this is the kind of conversation you want to have with me, please hang out with me here. Come find me on Instagram too. It is super common that in this time of life, with all kinds of stressors, being a caregiver, having to switch your career, having to find a new career, divorce, marital changes, partnership changes, you can experience way more stress. And if your go-to in coping with stress has been food, well, you may find yourself turning to food a little bit more. If we were actually looking for internet definitions of emotional eating, it's pretty much defined as eating in response to an emotion rather than a bodily cue. So if you eat without hunger, you could potentially be emotionally eating. Whereas if you were hungry and you ate, well, you're eating to a body cue. But I want to normalize emotional eating, because if you've been to a birthday party and you felt really happy, what if it's your own birthday party and you felt really happy to have another birthday and you had a piece of cake? Are you not emotionally eating? Like, isn't that a human thing? Isn't emotionally eating a human thing? But okay, I know sometimes we can eat to distract ourselves from our feelings. And if you're like me, you don't even know that you are doing it. And you may sometimes wonder if it can have negative consequences on your physical and your emotional health. And you know what? Maybe it can. But I don't think this conversation about emotional eating can be so black or white. There's a lot of gray. One of the favorite word candy phrases out on the internet right now is that the conversation is nuanced. And I love that word because it is. It can go here, it can go there, it can weave. It's not black or white. It all depends on who you are and your circumstances. Maybe at this point in life, you really don't care because you're caught between like really hard PMS and you fight the cravings for chocolate or simple carbs like bread, all of those comfort types of foods or sugar hit kinds of foods, and you just don't care. You just feel like you cannot stop and you need to eat the food. And even though you stress about your weight gain or the changing shape of your body or maybe even your health by eating too many simple carbs, the fact of the matter is that you can still have these cravings and it can feel like nothing can stop them. So is there actually a link between being menopausal and emotionally eating? I think we can find quite a few. And I almost don't know where to start because menopause brings, or perimenopause, it brings so many changes in our bodies that start with how we feel, our moods, but it does translate to the shape. We might put more weight on in the middle. We fight the weight in the middle. We fight the weight all over. We feel like our skin is a little more saggy. Maybe we're like a little more wrinkly, and it's frustrating. But sometimes we have to just be happy to have another birthday. I digress. We are having changes in hormone levels. We are having changes in estrogen and progesterone. If you're perimenopausal, the estrogen might be erratic. You might be more what they call estrogen dominant in relation to your progesterone if the estrogen is going up. And I know estrogen dominance is another touchy subject that people don't want to talk about because some people believe in it and some people don't. But the fact of the matter is there's a lot of hormone changes going on, and they can affect hunger hormones as well. You can also see changes in your stress hormones like cortisol and your ability to manage blood sugar, because that can happen with your insulin as well too. It's all connected and frustrating. And look, considering that these hormones have a huge impact on stress and anxiety, and if you pull in all the life factors that go on in life at this age, right? We've lost parents, we lose loved ones, we go through lots of changes and emotional upheaval. Well, it's no wonder that it comes together in a perfect storm, and you might want to go to the fridge to feel better. Not to mention, if you spend time hot flashing or you can't sleep at night, you have a biological reason for cravings because your body is looking for quick energy. Add to this the fact that in menopause, we have a change in body composition where we've been losing lean muscle like for a while now. And if we're not doing weight training or weight bearing exercise to preserve that in our bones, we might see a shift to more, well, fatty tissue in and around the body. And yeah, we don't like that either. And I'm saying this collectively as we, because there's times where I'm like, you know what, I'm happy to be almost 60. I'm happy to be here. And yeah, there's times where I look in the mirror, I'm like, who are you? Sometimes the cycle of emotional eating feels really hard to break. And while I say that emotional eating is normal, you can decide whether or not you want to manage it. It can feel like a vicious cycle. I think what I'm going to do is put some of the research links in the show notes, because I have one that actually talks about how understanding your triggers to eating become imperative in managing a healthier lifestyle. And I say healthier rather than healthy because I think that word health is relative to begin with, relative to the person. It means different things to different people. I also have another nerdy link about how chemistry in the brain can lead to food wanting. Dr. Kent Berridge, whose article I'm linking, talks about the difference between food wanting and food liking. And he says that when you like something, well, you're just enjoying the food that you are eating, but wanting can fall into the category of wanting to eat when you're not hungry. And while these science articles are not like the basis of the video, I think they're both two things that we can experience and that can also be pretty nuanced when you try to decide whether you really like a food and you like to eat it because you're hungry, or you really want a food, because sometimes emotions can override what we think is a hunger signal or a fullness signal. And this is a perfect way to segue into that whole stress of menopause, the stress that enters in menopause. And yes, I'm in a different outfit because when I was filming this video yesterday, my mic died. And so there was just a whole lot of and so here I am. I didn't want to go and make my hair the same and get the same shirt on and all of that. Done is better than perfect, I hope, for you. And we're going to continue to talk about emotional eating and stress eating in menopause, because stress is a common trigger for emotional eating. And when I think of the word stress, it can encompass so many different feelings, right? So many things can cause stress. Stress can become overwhelming. And if you are like me, where you are used to emotional eating at many points in your life, you can fall back on old behaviors. And I'm going to tell you that that's okay. There's actually a whole theory and framework around the fact that sometimes we regress and do the same things that we're used to doing. We're patterned that way. Awareness, again, is the key to changing those patterns and even, overcoming the patterns when you go back to them. This stress can become so overwhelming, and then we have a desire to seek comfort in food, and then it becomes like a bit of a cycle, and we shame ourselves for this cycle, right? You can get stressed, so then you eat the food because you chose the food as a coping mechanism, or it is a subconscious behavior that you go to. And what happens? Guilt sets in. And when that guilt sets in, what happens? You either restrict the food or you stay there and eat all the food. You have like a last supper moment because you're going to get rid of the ice cream, the cake, the cookies, the pizza, whatever. And then you go into like, okay, today's a new day. I'm going to restrict today. And you might not even be conscious of this. And then another trigger happens and you go back into this cycle. And what we do is shame ourselves for reverting back to this behavior. And I had to remind myself this over the summer when I was really overwhelmed that, there's a theory of behavior change. It's the stages of change. There is actually a stage called the relapse. And yes, it's pulled from addiction circles, but the relapse is really just where we go back to our old patterns, and you're human. And so when you're aware, you can move yourself into different stages of change. That's going to be another video. Breaking this cycle requires finding alternative methods to eating for coping. And I'm not saying that we can't eat to cope, right? We can choose the eating. That's the thing about mindful eating. When you embrace a mindful eating practice, you tune into what you need emotionally, physically, spiritually, and you make a choice. And I want to say alternative coping mechanisms because I don't want to say healthier. We have so much of a focus on this term healthy when we have different definitions of what health is. I've said this before in other videos. What's healthy for me isn't always healthy for you. They're different things. And sometimes the healthy choice for me might be to seek comfort in food. And maybe that food's a bowl of soup. Sometimes that type of eating is a form of self-care. And yes, sometimes we can overeat. It's not black and white. And that's where this word candy nuance comes in. We've heard this on the internet before. It's another buzzword out there, I think, in the food freedom circles, but it makes so much sense, right? It's like anything in health and wellness. It's nuanced based on that person's experience in life and who they are. And it brings us all back to how we care for ourselves in menopause, because this is a time of figuring out who we are, even who we are as an eater. You can do that by noticing how you even talk to yourself when you get in this cycle. Even if you are an emotional eater and you're sort of stuck in this cycle, self-care in menopause is so important. It really is. It's a time that we need to really be gentle with ourselves, be kind to ourselves. And if I'm not kind to myself, who else is going to be? We need to give ourselves grace. When you think about it, taking care of ourselves this way, taking care of our mental, our emotional, our physical, our whole well-being in a holistic way reduces stress. And what makes perimenopause and menopause and postmenopause a less enjoyable experience? It's the stress. Our nervous system is what we need to care for top tier. I think we need to prioritize bringing joy to all of our activities as best we can. And sometimes that means bringing joy to the table and not forgetting that being stressed, whether it's around food or other things, it can be a huge driver of hot flashes, cravings, and all the other fun stuff we experience in menopause. And sometimes we separate cravings from emotional eating, but they very, very much are intertwined. Think about it. If you get a craving for a chocolate or a bag of chips or something, pizza, food, it's like soup, anything, what's happening? Especially if you're not hungry, right? What's happening? Stop and see if that craving is from an emotion, because it can be. And I have a different way of separating this out, because we can have cravings from emotions. This seems to be like a big umbrella, but we can also have cravings from other things. And I call this little section the ebb and flow of cravings, because it can be environment, behavior, biology, EBB. And when you start to understand those triggers, because we can have emotions and other things, then you can get really deep into your awareness around why you eat when you're not hungry. Let me give you some examples. Let's talk about environment. Say you work outside of the home and you have a lunchroom like I did when I was in dental, where people brought in all kinds of food. Foods were like dolmades, like a Greek grapevine rice thing. Delicious. I wanted to eat them all. But there was also cookies and chocolate. Sometimes there was gourmet pizza. It's temptation. It's in the environment. And just because I walked into the lunchroom, I wasn't hungry, but I smelled that pizza. I smelled that tomato sauce. I smelled somebody else's food, or I saw a cookie, and that triggered the want of eating. And I'm pulling two things together here because there's nose hunger and there's eye hunger. So those two things combined to trigger my desire to eat. That was in the environment. Okay, what about behavior? Do you have a particular time of the day where you want to eat? Were you patterned as a kid to always eat at noon? Think about going to school. You might have woken up late and you missed breakfast time. So then you're starving by 10, but you're not allowed to eat when you're in public school. And, or at least I wasn't. And like you have to wait till noon. So you get patterned to think that noon is lunchtime. So your stomach thinks noon is lunchtime as well. Same thing with dinner. You have a particular time that you think about as dinner time. And that becomes a bit of a behavior or a habit to eat at 5 or 12, regardless of your hunger, or to deny your hunger until it's dinner time. This used to be a big bone of contention in our family as to when the kids got fed, because both my partner and I had different ideas about meals and what they looked like. Oh, what a can of worms that one is. And of course, if you always want to eat popcorn or chips with Netflix, again, is that a behavior or is it environment? It could be a bit of both. In fact, I read a really good experiment on popcorn and the theater, and people who were put into a theater, two different groups. They go to a theater and there was more popcorn smell and more crunching in one theater as opposed to the other. And what group do you think ate the most popcorn? This set. This set. Isn't that cool? So trying to categorize your cravings into that emotional, environment, behavior, biology, looking at your ebb and flow of cravings is one way that you can start to gain this awareness around your eating triggers. And another way is actually just asking if you are physically hungry or not. It's a yes or no answer. I shouldn't say that. It can be nuanced. And actually asking yourself if you're hungry or full can be a start as well. Now, there is lots of grayness or nuance between the hunger and the fullness, but it can be a start if you're trying to dig into your own body cues. In fact, I want to share more about that, but let's just talk about some of the things that you can do to feel a little more balanced. I don't know if I even like that word when it comes to your eating as an emotional person. And I guess a broad tip could be mindful eating. Could you practice some of the aspects of mindful eating if you decide to have your crave food? Could you just eat the cookie or the donut? Take your time and savor it. And that's easier said than done when the guilt thoughts are going through your head. But give yourself a little signal like stop, pause, say the word, and just enjoy the taste of your donut. And maybe you can notice when the feelings of guilt come up. Is it with every bite? Is it at the end when you're finished? Is it when you actually want another one? And you can always sort of pause and tune into how that donut tastes through the whole experience. Maybe it tastes really good at the beginning, but it wanes through the middle. This is a whole skill that you might want to try and practice. You're not supposed to learn it overnight. I'm still working on it, but it's really interesting when you bring this to food, because when you take the time to savor your bites and really be with your food, you honestly become way more satisfied with it, or the opposite happens and you realize this actually doesn't taste so good. And then there's always that sort of tip to find alternatives. It's the swap thing, right? So depending on the type of person you are, maybe you can swap some of these like protein, date, chocolate chip type balls for like a high sugar laden snack. Maybe that will help slow your blood sugar a little bit because that becomes important in menopause. Or perhaps you might just eat the thing. And the swap is always an option. For me, though, if I'm going to eat something sugary and I crave something really sugary, the problem with the matcha date nut butter balls is that I could still eat 20 of them. I really can if I'm in that autopilot zone of wanting to eat the thing. So I may as well just have the friggin' cookie. Do you know what I think is really missing when it comes to this emotional eating discussion if you are an emotional eater? And that is having a support network. Do you have friends who also struggle with this? And can you kind of come together, maybe with a video like this, and create like a like-minded discussion group or a support network when it comes to cravings and emotional eating? It sounds kind of funny as I'm saying this off the top of my head, but why not? I have a couple nutritionist friends who also love to cook, who also are in menopause, and we talk about these body changes and how we feel. And I'm telling you, it is so uplifting. It is so good. And I'm going to leave you with maybe this little takeaway. If you've been restricting your diet for years, if you've been on and off certain plans, point counting, measuring in cups, I think we've all done various diets like that where you've like knocked out food groups. This can actually cause you to want to eat more, because of that deprivation mentality. And I know in intuitive eating circles, that's a big focus, this deprivation mentality driving you to eat more, but it is a thing. I also just want to add that it's not the whole thing. There are other aspects to someone wanting to eat more, like food deprivation in their childhood. That was me. So really, again, it's a nuanced kind of discussion. I just feel so strongly that at this point in life, what's healthy enough? What are we doing enough to stay relatively healthy and enjoy things that we like, whether it is paddleboarding, chocolate cake, a nap, a run. You know what I mean? Take some time to start sifting through and recognizing your body cues and hunger and fullness and all the in-betweens. So if that's something you'd like to start with, I find that to be the easiest step. Quite frankly, it was for me. I have a small little webinar that you can grab below, and it takes you through asking yourself, are you hungry or are you full? Even going through the hunger and fullness scale, varying degrees in between. But the best part I think about it is that it identifies all kinds of hunger. So when I'm talking about the office and you walk in and you smell nose hunger and you see lasagna or pizza, eye hunger, you can actually start to break your hunger down into these categories. I've got a little section and a workbook for you in there so that you can decide, am I actually hungry in my stomach? Do my cells crave something because I'm lacking some minerals? Or am I just seeing the food? Am I smelling the food? And that's my trigger to hunger. It's really quite fascinating once you let yourself get curious about your own body and needs. I hope this was helpful for you. And that webinar is also included in my Mindless to Mindful course. And if you want to explore more about this buzzword of food freedom, I invite you to watch the rest of my videos here. I am trying to add more to them. But again, if you have some specifics about topics, pop them below. And I hope to see you on the next video. Bye for now.